right, this is part one of Learning Activity 9. Um, we're going to be looking at our simple responsibility principle trading, currency trading example. Um, we remember this is an example we started with earlier, and it was one big method. We then broke it up into multiple smaller methods. We then, in the last class, took those methods and broke them up into a number of different classes and put interfaces between them. And now we're going to start seeing how those interfaces will allow us to modify the code more easily. And then we'll continue this next week where we'll do a decorator pattern on those stuff. So start by cloning this project, the Unit 9 Trader project here in GitHub. So again, just get that assignment set up, clone it. We'll open up that solution then. And just a quick review of this. So we broke it up into classes and followed similar to what the textbook does, but now we're actually going to use the textbook solution from their GitHub repository. So it's a little different. So let me walk you through a couple things. Unit 9 Trader is the main file with the main code in it, but just to get back to that in a sec. First, all the interfaces have been moved into this Unit 9 Trader contracts area. So we have each of our interfaces is defined in here. So we'll have to remember that, and we'll have to use make sure we reference this trader.contracts when we're referring to an interface. Also, the trade record itself. Again, this is the record that we're using, our kind of data record that we're storing trades in. This is also in here. So these are kind of our utilities, our contract stuff. The database stuff has been moved into this ADO.NET separate project. I'm not quite sure why they moved it in a separate project, but the textbook does. So the ADO.NET stores this stuff in a database. I've converted it to use our Azure network connection up here. And so it uses our shared connection stuff. And remember, that shuts down after an hour of unuse. And so if you run this and it doesn't connect right away, count to 10 and run it again. And then the servers usually started up, spun up again at Amazon. Also, the SQL that we use to create the database structure is also in here, just as a placeholder. But again, most of the code is in this Unit 9 Trader. So it includes our main program. If you remember the structure of this, we create all of our objects and put our objects together and pass them to other objects here. So for example, we create our trade processor and we pass our trade processor We do have another stream data provider, and that just has one. It just reads, makes sure we can read from a file and properly, and that just does that. Okay, so back here, so we want to make sure that URL trade data provider tests pass, and it doesn't. So we want to modify the URL trade data provider. And what's done, this is what I often think of it with test-driven design, is someone's gone in, like a senior designer or senior developer has gone in and done the basic setup for you. That senior developer, set up a URL trade provider class that implements this interface in the same way that our stream data provider implements that interface. So we implement that interface and then just implement that interface. And so all that does is define the get trade data method, and it just throws an exception. So it's not implemented yet. And then we also need a constructor here, and we're passing in a URL that we're going to use in this to get the data from, and a logger that we can log messages from. Now, right now, these aren't stored anywhere. They're just passed in here. So we're going to have to store them and work with them. But again, the basic structure is set up, and then the main program, the test environment set up, and in fact, even here, the main program is also set up. So we define a URL trade provider, and here's our URL. And we can actually try out this URL here. So if I open up my web browser and just go to that URL, it's just a text file stored on a local server. So it's just on the faculty.css.edu server, and it just has some sample trades. So this isn't using an API, where it's just grabbing a file over the internet rather than a local file for that. And so that's set up here, and then we have this, but we define it, but you see it's grayed out because we're not actually using it yet, so we'll have to use that. So your job is then to modify this code here, and I give you some starting code again because we haven't done this. So I would say grab this starting code here, copy it out, and where we throw this exception, we'll delete that and put this new code in there and try to get this to work. Now, one thing, this should be a list of strings. I had a typo in there. So it should be a list of strings for that. And then why don't you pause this and see if you can get this data to work. Store these, the string, the URL, and the logger in variables. They're passed in another constructor. You'll need those here for stuff. Add a log statement maybe to show something going on here, and try to get this work to whatever includes you want. Okay, so pause this and see if you can get this to work. And I'm just going to walk through this. So hopefully you've paused this and tried it out. So again, we want this string URL and the IR logger. We need those local variables. So I'm just going to add those down below here as two local variables. And then when we're passed in here, we're just going to store them. So this dot URL is equal to URL, and this dot logger is equal to logger. So the constructor passes those in, and we just store them in these local variables. These are our method variables. Okay, so now that clears up this when we're opening this URL that's there. And I could use the logger. Now I'm going to actually look at the other one and see what we're calling logger.log information. We're saying reading trades. So right at the top, all we're doing is just saying we're reading from the file. And I want to do that here too, so we make sure we're reading from the right file. So here, before we even do much, I'm going to add a log statement. So again, I'm just going to say logger dot log info, not log warning, and I'm just going to say some text. So reading trade file from URL, and maybe I'll actually specify that URL here, so I can just do URL and put a semicolon at the end. Okay, so now I'm just going to log that we're reading that here. Web client, we've got to include system.net, using that. Stream reader, again, using system.io, so we got to make sure those are up here. We don't really need system.txt. I'm going to delete that, I think. And I already have contracts here because we needed those for these interfaces. Okay, so now let's go through this. We declare a list. So all we're doing is reading a file in one line at a time, storing each line into a separate string and putting it all together in a list of strings. So we declare a new list of strings called string data. We start up a web client. We're given a URL here when we do the constructor. And so we just open that URL here as a stream. And then the rest of this is just like the other one. Basically, we create a stream reader using that stream. We're just reading then each line. While each line does not equal null, we just read the next line in, and it'll eventually be null when we get to the end of file. We read each line in from the file, from the URL, and each line gets added to this list. It starts as an empty list, and we add each things. We're returning a list, actually IEnumerable, which is again an uneditable version of a list, interface into a list or any collection there. So we're returning trade data as that. So that's all we need to do here. We can save that, push that if we want. Now we can do a couple things. We can run our tests here. So if I bring back our test environment and run our tests, hopefully this URL trade provider tests will be good. So yeah, we're now passing that test. We haven't done the RESTful one, and the simple validation, we're doing the assignment, but we've got one more green check here, so that's good for this. And then we can actually run the program itself. And it reads the data from the file system. So this isn't right. We want to be reading that from the URL, not from the file system. So we forgot something there. So let's go back and look. Now, if we go back to our main program here, we create this URL trade provider and we pass in the URL for that. But you notice it's gray. That's because we never use it. When we create our trade processor, we need to pass in this URL trade provider, and so now we'll be using that. So yeah, we want to update that, and this is all we have to do. What's nice about this structure is that since these all implement the same interface, we can swap from one to the other. So rather than doing from a file, we can switch this to our URL trade provider, send that in. This trade processor just expects a trade data and just knows that it's going to call process trades. No, yeah, get trade data. It knows that that's because that's what's defined in the interface there. The trade data provider interface is just get trade data. So it knows whatever it's going to have a get trade data method. So it's just going to call that here. So we can swap this out. So now we swap that out. We can then save that and run this again. Let's bring this over. And now it says reading trade file from a URL, and now it's reading it from a URL and processing the trades. And again, if this is writing to Amazon, so it went pretty fast, so you know that web service is up and running for the next hour till whilst people are using it. If it's not, just again pause and run it again. So, okay, so that ends part one here, where we've used test-driven design. Our test now passes, and we're good. So.